The betrayal by my wife and daughter completely shattered our family, and this is the story of how I sought vengeance. Picture an average household. I'm Trevor Fruiton, a 45-year-old man with a receding hairline. I stay reasonably fit, although I haven't managed to get those elusive six-pack abs. Shedding a few extra pounds would probably do me good. I prefer a clean-shaven face and choose contact lenses over glasses. Michelle, my wife, has a graceful figure with a slight belly and rounded back, features I find appealing. She's neither exceptionally beautiful nor unattractive, just a typical woman. Michelle is 45 and wears glasses. She's adamant about not shortening her name. Our daughter, Allie, is 21, a smart college student. Like her mother, she's put on some weight since her high school volleyball days. Despite being an advocate for women's rights and valuing independence, Allie still heavily relies on us financially. As the sole provider, I chose to cover her tuition fees instead of burdening her with student loans. In exchange, she reluctantly agreed to continue living at home. Although we live modestly, Michelle and Allie enjoy luxury. While they drive high-end sedans, I stick with my aging F-150. Unfortunately, their extravagant spending has left us with minimal home equity, as much of it went toward housing loans. Resolving these financial challenges has become a pressing concern. Our suburban lifestyle is fairly standard, with occasional neighborhood gatherings. While we're not particularly close to many neighbors, we do share a good bond with those living nearby, including a married couple from the adjacent street. Their daughter, Sally, is Allie's best friend. When Allie left for college, Sally felt a void, and it echoed in our own household. Michelle and I spent more time together, but couldn't entirely fill that gap. Michelle's increasing involvement in volunteer work also didn't seem to help. One evening, I asked Michelle if she was happy. She appeared confused and asked what brought the question up. I shared that, while content overall, I had noticed her becoming distant and less enthusiastic lately. I missed the happier moments we had shared as a family, particularly with Allie. Michelle assured me that everything was fine and she had no complaints. Perplexed, I probed further, curious about what might be on her mind. My sole intention was to ensure her happiness, and I even suggested she see a counselor for some guidance. She hesitated, but promised to think about it. As the weather grew colder, I, at length, took a step back. But 2 weeks later, Michelle announced she would attend weekly sessions with a life coach. I hoped this might reignite passion in our relationship, but it didn't. Our intimacy remained steady at twice a week, with no signs of change. I'm not one to complain. Michelle tolerates my occasional premature finishes, just as I accept her occasional fake enthusiasm. Normalcy is subjective, and honestly, I'm unsure where we stand. I've never been one to share details about my personal life, nor do I encourage my friends to discuss theirs. Among our neighbors, Mark and Cindy, a couple in their 60s, stand out. Mark isn't particularly handy, often hurting himself during repairs. Cindy, on the other hand, is a fantastic baker and frequently spoils Mark with treats, adding to his waistline. One weekend, I was helping them fix their sauna pump, which Mark had been unable to repair for months. These opportunities are rare in early December, so I made the most of it. While I worked in their backyard, I noticed the familiar sound of our patio door opening. It wasn't Michelle, who was visiting her mother, so it had to be Allie. Confirming my suspicion, I overheard her talking. She was intentionally speaking softly to avoid being overheard. "Oh, Mom, you're so behind the times. Maybe give Max a try. Sally says he's very experienced and could spice things up in the bedroom," Allie remarked. I was stunned. My wife had apparently confided in our daughter about our private issues. This was not only inappropriate, but also deeply hurtful. Why hadn't she talked to me instead? Allie continued, "By the way, Dad's going hunting next weekend. I'll ask Jeff to bring Max over. Sally says he's skinny but really into you. Sally even described Max's physical traits." I felt my anger rising, but forced myself to listen carefully. It seemed my daughter was orchestrating a meeting between Michelle and this Max. Sally's voice chimed in again. "Whether you go for it or not, Mom, at least consider it. Max could help you break the monotony." Their conversation ended with Allie saying, "Keep me updated. Love you." My frustration boiled over, yet I managed to focus on the sauna pump without hurting myself. The atmosphere at home the following week was unbearable. I deliberately distanced myself, spending most of my time in my garage sharpening tools or hiding in my office. I didn't cancel the hunting trip, but arranged for someone to discreetly monitor Michelle's actions. Later, photos surfaced showing Allie, Jeff, and a thin young man. Around midday, I noticed on the camera footage that Sally and Jeff entered the house, followed by a skinny young man. About 4 hours later, all three left. I returned on Sunday to find Michelle wearing sweatpants, acting unusually affectionate with excessive hugging and smiling. I stayed unresponsive to her behavior. Although there was no concrete proof of anything, I couldn't help but observe how Michelle sat cross-legged, leaning heavily to one side, more than usual, as if something might have made her uncomfortable. Later in the kitchen, Allie shifted everything when she jokingly smacked Michelle on the rear, prompting both of them to burst into laughter. Pretending to cough, I felt an oppressive weight in my chest. I silently prayed that if my wife was hiding something, she wouldn't pass it on to me. That night, I chose to sleep on the living room couch. Michelle didn't press me to change my mind. In the morning, I claimed I was having trouble breathing and needed to visit a doctor, though it was just a ruse. Fortunately, my boss didn't mind me taking a day off. I decided to fake having COVID-19 to make a quick escape, using my accumulated sick leave and vacation time to take a break. I planned to return just in time for the traditional Christmas Eve dinner. My lie about having COVID-19 created fear, and everyone kept their distance, though I doubted anyone truly believed it. I'd been fully vaccinated and felt physically fine despite my broken heart and seething anger toward 4 individuals. To avoid more tension, I checked into an extended stay hotel. I felt relieved when Michelle expressed joy that I'd be out of isolation before Christmas. She and Allie called me twice a day. While I kept a polite demeanor, I feigned exhaustion during these conversations. Meanwhile, I concentrated on meticulously planning my revenge. I began restructuring all my financial accounts, including updating my will, changing beneficiaries, and revising emergency contacts. It surprised me how many connections and obligations I had accumulated over time. Finding a new apartment became a significant challenge and made me fully grasp the permanence of my decision to divorce Michelle and cut off Allie's financial support. As for Jeff, he needed to face the consequences of his actions, though I remained uncertain about how to deal with Max. When anger clouds judgment, countless ideas come to mind, but acting on many of them could jeopardize long-term plans. One scheme, inspired by the news, involved hiring an escort to trap Jeff in a compromising situation. While effective, this could harm Allie, who, despite her role, I felt didn't deserve such a punishment. On Christmas Eve, we gathered around the dining table, admiring the artificial Christmas tree adorned with red, white, and green lights. The scent of pine cones filled the air. Over the past 23 years, we had made these dinners a cherished tradition, though not everyone always attended. The first 2 gatherings saw Michelle busy in the kitchen, but now we all sat together to enjoy the meal. Normally, I'd take this moment to express gratitude, but this time, my speech wasn't going to be cheerful. When I stood, it became clear I had something serious to say. I turned to Jeff and casually asked what he thought of Heather. His face drained of color, catching Allie's attention. She had been dating Jeff since high school, and no one doubted their future together. Jeff stammered, clearly caught off guard. His denial was unconvincing, and it seemed he'd rather jump from a speeding train than face the situation. Using the classic tactic of feigning ignorance, he mumbled that he didn't recognize the name. Unconvinced, I decided to play my trump card. Pulling out my phone, I played an audio clip of Heather's voice saying, "Oh, Jeff, you're amazing. I'm so glad we met again." As the recording ended, Allie erupted in fury, screaming at Jeff for betraying her and ordering him to leave immediately. Acting swiftly, I moved behind Jeff to prevent Allie from physically attacking him. Both Jeff and I managed to block her desperate attempts. I instructed Michelle to take Allie to another room and calm her down, as her behavior resembled that of a feral animal. Michelle reluctantly led Allie to the kitchen, but her loud cursing echoed, shattering the serene atmosphere among the dinnerware. In the meantime, I turned my attention to Jeff. I made it abundantly clear that he needed to warn Max to stay away from me. I promised Max would deeply regret it if we crossed paths. Jeff was sternly told his involvement in this matter was unacceptable, and I made sure he understood I didn't want to see him again. His pale face revealed he grasped the severity of his situation and the limited options before him. I handed him an envelope and demanded he complete one final task on my behalf. Calling loudly into the kitchen, I urged Michelle to return with Allie, announcing we were ready to talk. Allie's glare toward Jeff was so intense it could have been lethal. Michelle looked bewildered, her eyes betraying her distress. Both women were visibly upset, with tears streaming down their faces. Turning to Jeff, I began explaining how I had obtained the recording. I clarified that Heather wasn't her real name. She was an escort I had hired for a hefty sum to entice him, documenting the entire interaction. I added that there was a video available if anyone wanted proof. When Allie demanded to know why I had done this, I admitted it calmly. Despite my composed response, Allie's reaction was one of utter betrayal, as though I had stabbed her in the back. Michelle let out a faint, frightened sound, avoiding eye contact with her daughter. Both women sat in shock, their tears falling freely. "Your turn, Jeff," I said, switching my phone to record video. Jeff stood, picked up the folder before him, and addressed Michelle. "Michelle Fruiton, you've officially been served. I sincerely apologize for the oversight. I will now revise the text with absolutely no omission of details. Let me rewrite it while strictly retaining every single element and ensuring no cutting or shortening. One moment, please." He declared while handing her a folder, and the room was filled with an intense tension as we all waited for Michelle's response. I couldn't tell if she was about to faint or vomit. At first, she passed out, but after regaining consciousness, she began to throw up. The decorative pine cones on the table seemed utterly insignificant compared to the drama unfolding. Jeff had handed Michelle divorce papers and left the house immediately afterward, leaving Allie to comfort her distraught mother. Allie's tears streamed uncontrollably as the weight of the situation overwhelmed her. Meanwhile, I took control of the chaos inside the master bedroom. Allie's prized possession, a special gift for completing her 4-year training, was carefully packed into a carrier and discreetly removed. The rest of her valuables were hastily thrown into a garbage bag and left on the house's porch. Soon, Michelle's luxury car pulled into the driveway, highlighting the contrast between her lavish vehicle and the battered sedan that had been in use for 23 years, a silent symbol of our marriage. According to my lawyer, I was still legally obligated to provide Michelle with transportation. As I sipped bourbon, I verified that all credit cards, Allies included, where I was a co-borrower, had been fully paid off and canceled. The cell phone contracts were also terminated. I had provided Michelle with a new basic phone plan offering 60 minutes of talk time and 100 text messages, along with a modest device, a Tacoma model. However, Ally wasn't afforded the same benefit. Both still possessed iPhones with advanced cameras, but they would now need to pay for their own plans. Regarding the house, I confidently hammered a for sale sign into the front yard. Although I couldn't officially sell the property yet due to Michelle's name being on the deed, I wanted her to get a clear picture of what lay ahead. Instead of remaining near the Christmas tree, where cheerful music played softly, I retreated to the basement. I retreated to the basement. Sitting in the dark, I found solace amidst the turmoil happening above me. It was evident that nothing they once owned was working properly anymore. The harsh words they hurled at me sounded muted compared to the intense phrases I had rehearsed in the quiet solitude of my hotel room while preparing for this day. "Trevor, we need to talk," Michelle's voice called out. "Maybe he went for a walk. His car is parked outside," Allie suggested. "But where's my car? And why isn't my phone working?" she continued, her panic rising. Michelle added, "Let's go to Cindy's and see if she'll let us use her phone." I ensured the door locks were secure as they stood outside, now without working phones, credit cards, or identification. Both of their purses had been left inside. I felt no guilt as I fed their driver's licenses into the paper shredder, knowing it would add considerable difficulty to their attempts to rebuild their lives. Pouring another glass of bourbon, I turned on the TV to watch a low-budget Christmas special. The joyful scenes on the screen stood in stark contrast to the grim reality of our situation. Silence felt like the most appropriate response. Suddenly, I heard a commotion at the front door. Michelle and Allie had returned. At that moment, Allie, whom I no longer regarded as my daughter, noticed the garbage bag on the porch. She expressed shock as she realized everything she had in her car was now in that bag. "Dad got rid of my car?" she exclaimed in disbelief. It was hard for her to fathom such a thing, as it was completely out of character for me. In their conversation, Allie speculated that her father might have sold the car. "If that's true, I swear I'll confront him," she said, her love for that car evident in her voice. The persistent ringing of the doorbell made it difficult to follow their conversation. Two women stood outside holding festive napkins, creating an ironic image. Michelle, visibly furious, demanded that I open the door, pointing out the freezing weather. Calmly, I responded that the keys to her new car were in the ignition. "It's an orange-green Malibu parked outside," I clarified, adding that all her belongings from the previous car had been transferred into it. "Maybe you can give it to Max," I suggested, alluding to her possible relationship with him. After a pause, Michelle softened her tone and extended holiday greetings to me. I coldly replied that it was time for her and Allie to leave, describing Allie as unpleasant. Eventually, the old Malibu sputtered to life, its worn-out muffler betraying its age. It wasn't surprising. The previous owner had practically begged me to take it off his hands. I had no intention of spending money on repairs. Without much fuss, they drove off. It had been years since I'd heard of anyone succumbing to carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty muffler, but I couldn't help but think, perhaps this time luck will be on my side. The odds, however, seemed slim. About an hour later, my phone lit up with a call from my father-in-law. Although we weren't particularly close, we had always managed to communicate civilly. "Hi, Trevor. I've got two very upset women here," he began. "I was hoping you could shed some light on the situation. Call me back. Merry Christmas, by the way." I muted my phone and took another sip of eggnog mixed with sparkling water, allowing the adrenaline to subside slowly. The flickering lights of the artificial Christmas tree cast a soothing glow, lulling me into a peaceful sleep. When I awoke on Christmas morning, the sun greeted me with its warm rays. The dining table was still scattered with cold leftovers, but the microwave quickly reheated my ham and cheesy potatoes, a meal perfectly suitable for any time of the day. With the holidays approaching, a pile of gifts sat waiting to be unwrapped. To my dismay, there was nothing for me under the brightly decorated Christmas tree, as the presents were reserved for the evening festivities. If anyone had been observant, they might have noticed the lack of gifts from me to anyone else. Rather than open the donated items, I opted to collect the most valuable possessions I wanted to take with me. No photographs preserved the memories we had shared. I was stuck in the moment, with everything I encountered now lying scattered on the floor. A few days later, Michelle showed up at my house. The sun had already set, and a chilly wind swept through the air as I opened the door, leaving the latch partially secured. I half expected someone selling poinsettias for a youth sports fundraiser, but instead, a pale and makeup-free Michelle stood before me. Her hair, usually styled, was undone. She begged me not to shut the door, and I paused, allowing her to speak. She asked for a chance to explain herself and pleaded to come inside, insisting that the neighbors didn't need to know. I asked her what she wanted, and she sincerely apologized without offering excuses for her actions. When I pressed her to clarify, she admitted to having been intimate with Max. My feigned surprise caught her off guard, and her widened eyes revealed her shock that I already knew. I accused her of lacking grounds for a divorce and asked if she had hired a lawyer. She admitted she was in the process but thought we could still resolve our issues and avoid separating. I firmly told her it was too late, criticizing her for not taking action to save our marriage months earlier. I blamed her for selfishly involving our daughter in the situation, declaring that it was entirely her fault and that I no longer wanted anything to do with her or Allie. Michelle earnestly apologized and asked how she could make amends, but I told her there was nothing she could do. I expressed that I was better off without her, and that the decision regarding her infidelity was mine alone. She pleaded for me to delay taking action for a few weeks, claiming her lapse in judgment was a fleeting mistake. I dismissed her entirely, telling her to leave and not bother me again. As she begged and knocked on the door, I put on my noise-canceling headphones, successfully drowning out the sound. By morning, she was gone. Almost a year later, just one day shy of the anniversary, I sat alone in my modest 2-room apartment, continuing my Christmas Eve tradition. I had prepared a simple dinner for myself. Initially, cooking had been a struggle, and while people say betrayal feels like being stabbed in the back, for me, it shattered my heart. Self-esteem and confidence. Despite everything, I managed to preserve my self-respect. Many nights I questioned whether I had gone too far, but deep down I disagreed with those doubts. Eventually, I reached a point where I felt unnecessary and decided to walk away. At that time, grappling with uncertainty after the divorce, I felt like a failure. My attitude toward work soured, and I frequently snapped at colleagues, prompting repeated reprimands from my boss. Gradually, I withdrew from social interactions, choosing a reclusive lifestyle. My coworkers gave me space, and I channeled my energy entirely into work, fulfilling my responsibilities flawlessly. I deliberately avoided office parties, and when friends tried to arrange introductions, I politely declined. Over time, my friends drifted away, one by one. In search of solace, I took up running with headphones on, enjoying the solitude as people passed by without disturbing me. This new hobby, along with cooking for myself, helped me lose a few pounds, making my old clothes too big. I upgraded my wardrobe to a more modern style. Occasionally, a coworker would compliment my appearance, but nothing beyond that. The divorce dragged on for a grueling 9 months. When we finally reached a resolution, our house quickly sold. Instead of monthly alimony, Michelle received the majority of the sale proceeds. Sally and Jeff had parted ways, as Jeff's actions were deemed less forgivable than Michelle's infidelity. Last spring, while drunk, Jeff confronted me angrily, accusing me of orchestrating his affair with Heather. He always found someone else to blame for his mistakes. I wasn't around when he was with Heather. Like many men his age, he was weak and easily tempted by an attractive seductress. As for Allie, she channeled her anger toward me through furious voicemails, which I never responded to. Maybe one day I'll answer, but it's unlikely. Don't bet on it. I wasn't invited to her graduation and didn't attend. Michelle faced significant difficulties adjusting to her new reality. Having never worked during our marriage, finding a job was a struggle. My lawyer delayed resolving financial matters as much as possible. When the house finally sold, I ensured the money meant for her maintenance was paid entirely, as dictated by the court. This resulted in both of us losing the comfortable lifestyle we once had. During legal consultations, Michelle attempted to justify her poor decisions, but even she admitted it wasn't enough to erase nearly 25 years together. I stared at her with an emotionless expression as a few tears rolled down her cheeks. After about 10 songs, Macy wiped away a tear and went home. We were both still emotionally wounded. The tone of Allie's voicemails gradually changed. She began apologizing, but I continued to ignore her calls. My caring mother accidentally learned that Michelle had moved in with someone new, but I felt mostly indifferent about it. Slowly, I started engaging in casual conversations with people again. Former colleagues avoided me, while new ones found me peculiar. Making friends had always been challenging for me, but Macy helped me bridge that gap, though we remained just friends. In late January, I found a letter from Allie in my mailbox. Part of me hesitated to open it, unsure of its contents, but curiosity won. Inside, Allie apologized and included a selfie of herself, looking somber and holding her rounded stomach. The note read, "Daddy, I'm so sorry for my mistakes. I'm pregnant. I hope you can find it in your heart to accept your grandson. If not, I understand. Love." The return address revealed that she had moved, leaving me to wonder about her current situation. There was no mention of her husband or any indication of her marital status. I squinted at the picture, trying to spot rings on her fingers, but it was too difficult to tell. Despite my disdain for their mother, my longing for grandchildren remained as strong as ever. It took me several weeks to gather my thoughts before I could respond. During this time, Macy and I decided to part ways, realizing that we had only been sources of emotional support for one another. She chose to relocate far away to start fresh. After hugging me tightly a few times, she said her goodbyes and left my life for good. To maintain my sanity, I started playing pickleball at the local recreation center. Although the game is a simplified version of tennis with different rules, I found myself enjoying it, especially when paired with players of a similar skill level. It brought back memories of high school. Shannon entered my life with an energetic introduction. She seemed to be around my age and, like many others I played with, often missed the ball due to inexperience. Unfortunately, during one game, I accidentally hit Shannon in the chest with a poorly aimed throw. Her friends teasingly suggested that I should kiss her to make it better, causing Shannon to blush even more. After the match, Shannon joked that the least I could do was buy her a drink. We formally introduced ourselves, and she apologized for hitting me, admitting that she wasn't very familiar with the game. She confessed that starting conversations, especially with women, was challenging for her. Shannon mentioned a nearby Jamba Juice cafe and proposed that I treat her there. I agreed, and we strolled to the cafe. As we talked, we began to learn more about each other, though I struggled to sound articulate. Shannon noticed my hesitation and asked if I was in a relationship. I admitted that I didn't think I would ever be in one again, explaining that my past relationship ended due to infidelity. Shannon asked if my former partner had left me, and I clarified that she had cheated, which I couldn't accept. Although it had been a few years, I was still coming to terms with it. Shannon then asked if I was seeing anyone. I mentioned going on a few casual dates, but nothing serious. When she asked about the last time I went on a date, I admitted that it had been since the breakup. I had invited people to dinner, but it never led to anything more. I shared that my marriage had ended 26 months ago in December, and despite appearances, the process had been far from easy. Regaining my confidence after feeling abandoned took years. Sensing my discomfort, Shannon noticed my sweaty palms and suggested we change the topic. The conversation shifted to why I had started playing pickleball. I explained that I was tired of wallowing in self-pity and needed something new to fill my time. My friends had pushed me to try it, and eventually I gave in. Surprisingly, I discovered that I enjoyed it. Shannon shared that she also liked the game and mentioned having to leave. She told me she'd see me tomorrow for a match at 4 p.m. As we said goodbye, Shannon encouraged me to stay positive, expressing her belief that things would improve. That evening, I felt confident enough to respond to Allie. I wrote that I was open to trying, and although we might never be close, I wanted to meet my grandson. I asked her to let me know when the time was right, but I made it clear that I refused to be in the same room as her mother under any circumstances. I signed off as Mr. Fearing and included a selfie. I added that according to my calculations, her delivery date should have been in May or June. However, I wasn't sure if she had received my message, as I hadn't heard back from her. The next day during a pickleball match, Shannon and a few other women playfully flirted with me. After a particularly good hit, Shannon jokingly commented that I looked great in my shirt and might look even better without it. The other women laughed, and I felt my face flush. "Funny you should say that, Shannon," I replied. "I think you look great in those yoga pants, and even better without them." Shannon blushed, and the room erupted in laughter. The women began to chant for me to take my shirt off. Hesitantly, I obliged, but Shannon quickly shook her head, scolding me as though I had done something inappropriate. Amidst the playful whistles from the ladies, I hurriedly put my shirt back on. Shannon muttered, "You're terrible," and I replied with a light kiss. After the games, some of the women continued to flirt, and one even complimented Shannon on how great she looked without her yoga pants. Shannon waited for her turn to speak, maintaining her composure. I decided to treat her to a refreshing drink and was just about to ask her something when she teased me about her yoga pants again, flashing a pleased grin. While we sipped our drinks, I gathered the courage to invite Shannon to dinner and a movie. Nervous that she might decline, I was relieved when she accepted. Having been out of the dating world for over 27 years, I felt clumsy and awkward, but over time I relaxed and rediscovered my cheerful side. After a few dates, Shannon invited me to spend the night. Surprised, I asked, "What are you thinking about?" Her response caught me off guard. My simple reply was, "You." I couldn't help but wonder what she saw in me, a self-proclaimed failure. It felt like she saw me as more than I could see myself. In early June, Shannon brought up the birth of my granddaughter while we were in bed. Holding my hand, she revealed that she had been keeping an eye on the hospital's newborn registry. To my surprise, she discovered that a woman named Allie Fruiton had recently given birth to a girl. Her revelation eased my anxiety, but her affection reignited my desire for intimacy. Instead of a physical connection, we opted for something more emotional, sharing passionate kisses. Exhausted, I found comfort in Shannon's warmth. In my uncertainty, I considered my next move. Sending flowers felt like the right gesture, not out of love, but as an acknowledgement of Allie's new role as a mother. The day after sending the flowers, I unexpectedly received a letter. In it, as a father, I admitted the emptiness of my apologies, hoping they would still be perceived as genuine. The painful memories of our Christmas Eve fallout haunted me, fueling my lingering resentment. Allie expressed her bitterness, blaming me for disrupting her relationship with Jeff by taking her car, cutting off her phone, and forcing a significant change in her lifestyle. Over time, her immaturity had morphed into resentment, leaving her angry and hurt. After thinking deeply about the situation, Allie began to see things from my perspective. She admitted that the way I had been treated was unfair and undeserved. Unable to forgive herself, she expressed deep regret for her actions and described herself as a terrible person. Allie claimed to have experienced significant personal growth, saying she had transformed into an entirely different individual. She wept over her past behavior, describing it as truly evil. Despite the difficulty, she expressed her willingness to try and bring me back into her life, seeking reconciliation and comfort. Allie emphasized the importance of looking directly into her eyes when she sincerely asked for forgiveness, so I could fully grasp the depth of her remorse. She expressed a desire to build a friendship with me and shared a valuable lesson from a close friend about the contrast between good and evil, as well as weakness and strength. Allie wondered what she could give in return and mentioned that providing me with grandchildren might be one way. She revealed that she had named her daughter Bonnie after my mother. Currently, Allie and Bonnie lived together in a modest apartment, facing life as a team. Allie extended an open invitation for me to visit, or suggested arranging for Bonnie to spend time with me whenever she wasn't around. She concluded her letter by affirming her identity as my daughter and expressing a deep longing to feel my love again. I shared the letter with Shannon, who believed Allie's words to be genuine. My intention was to protect Shannon from Allie, given the harm Allie had caused in one of my past relationships. In response, Shannon embraced me warmly and kissed me passionately, assuring me that she wasn't worried. She told me she was emotionally strong and had barriers to keep unwanted people at bay, expressing gratitude that I had broken through hers. As we embraced tightly, moving gently like a slow dance to a love song, Shannon pointed out that I couldn't fully love her while clinging to resentment toward Allie and Jeff. She urged me to let go of my anger so that our relationship could grow. Echoing Shannon's advice about moving forward, we decided to visit Allie. The headlights illuminated the address of Allie's apartment as Shannon accompanied me to the door. I knocked softly and Allie answered. Once inside, I introduced Shannon to my daughter. We exchanged kind greetings with light cheek kisses before entering the cozy apartment. Allie suggested that I hold Bonnie, and I took a seat at the kitchen table, cradling her gently. To my surprise, Bonnie stayed calm, not crying at all. Holding her reminded me of how small and delicate babies' hands and feet are. When I glanced at Shannon, I could see love in her eyes. Shannon then brought up the topic of Bonnie's father, asking Allie if he had been informed about the baby's birth. Allie explained that Bonnie's father thought she was trying to trap him and wasn't sure if he would change his mind. Allie and I avoided addressing each other directly for most of the evening. When I left, I didn't hug or kiss Allie goodbye. As I got into the car, Shannon scolded me, insisting that Allie needed to know I still loved her. Shannon said firmly, "I know you love her, and you know it too. Go back and do it right." Leaving Shannon in the car, I returned to Allie's door and knocked. When she opened it, she asked, "Did you forget something?" I replied, "I kind of forgot to hug you and tell you that I love you." It was such an emotional moment that it felt like the plot of a Hallmark movie. 6 months passed, and a few weeks later, we gathered at my apartment for our traditional Christmas Eve dinner. Shannon, Allie, and I were all present, and I held Bonnie in my arms. I said a Christmas blessing before we enjoyed our meal and exchanged gifts. Bonnie received more presents than expected, but she seemed more interested in the sound of the crinkling wrapping paper. Due to the snowy weather, traveling long distances on Christmas Eve was too risky. A year later, I let Allie and Bonnie move into my apartment. Meanwhile, Shannon and I began staying at her place regularly. Continuing the Christmas Eve tradition, we prepared for a festive dinner at Shannon's house, this time before our upcoming wedding. Naturally, we had a prenuptial agreement in place. I noticed that I was being watched closely while chatting with other pickleball players, but it didn't bother me. This year, Allie's husband and Bonnie's father, Carter Denton, joined us. After some time, Carter realized he truly wanted to be part of Allie and Bonnie's lives. Bonnie and I had developed a close bond, often cuddling together, which made us great friends. Being a grandfather brought me immense joy. Shannon's children and grandchildren also joined the gathering, filling the house with warmth and energy. One of her sons led a heartfelt blessing, adding a special touch to the Christmas celebration. Reflecting on life, I realized that it continues to move forward whether we actively participate or not. It took me a while to recognize that I had been letting life pass me by, but that was no longer the case. I had finally found fulfillment in the life I was living, and I felt genuinely grateful for where I had ended up.